Welcome back. We are tackling something that confuses almost every beginner at first, but once it clicks forever, and it's about nested loops in Java. A nested loop is simply a loop inside another loop. Sounds simple, right? But it's the key to printing tables, grids, patterns, and later on working with 2D arrays and even game boards. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how Java runs a loop inside the loop, and we will build three things together: a simple counter, a multiplication table, and a star pyramid. Let's jump in right now. But before we nest anything, let's do a 10-second refresher on a normal for loop. And as you know, a for loop has three parts. The first one is basically the one which we are initializing a variable. And it's basically the starting point of the loop. In that case, we initialized I with the number 1. And the second part is basically the condition check. So while I is equal or less than 3, we will then execute the block inside that for loop. And at the end of every execution, we are adding or incrementing the variable I by 1. So if we execute that, you see by starting by 1, we are executing the system out print line until the third execution here. Nothing new. Now, here's today's big idea: a nested loop, which we want to execute inside that for loop. So what happens if I put a second loop inside the first one? Let's do that and say we want to copy that and paste it inside it and change the variable which we copied from above and call it j to change the other referencing points, string which we want to print out, and maybe not say I or j is whatever. Instead we say the first one is the auto loop and the second one is the inner loop. So before I hit run, try to predict what will the output be. Seriously, this is the best way to learn this, okay? And let's execute it. You see that we printed out the outer 1, 2, 3 times, and each one we executed basically the inner loop each time with that output. So each one we are counting up from 1 to 3. First one here, second one here, and the third one here, right? So basically here's the golden rule of nested loops. And if you remember one thing from this video, make this. For every single round of the outer loop, the inner loop runs completely from start to finish. So the outer loop runs 2 times or 3 times, and each of those times the inner loop does it full 3 rounds. And that's why inner gets printed 3 multiplied with 3, and that's in sum 9 times. So my favorite way to picture this is a clock. The hour hand is the outer loop and the minute hand is the inner loop. For the hour hand, the move forward just once. The minute hand is the inner loop. For the hour hand, my favorite way to picture this is a clock. The hour end is the outer loop and the minute end is the inner loop. For the hour end, to move forward just once. The minute end has to go all the way around, a full cycle. Hours are slow, minutes are fast. Outer loop is slow, inner loop is fast. So I guess you get the idea. Okay, now let's build something actually useful, a multiplication table. This is the classical real-world use of nested loops. Think about a table or what a table is. It has rows and columns, and that maps perfectly. The outer loop handles the rows, the inner loop handles the columns within each row. So maybe let me change our example right here. It will take a minute. So 2 important details here. First, notice I'm using print, not print line, inside the inner loop. Print stays on the same line, which is what keeps a row together. And the second point is that this system out print line at the bottom, it's the inside the outer loop. But after the inner loop, its only job is to jump to a new line once a row is finished. So a placement matters a lot here. Let me execute that. Voila. So this print line here makes each row represent the rows of the outer loop, and the inner loop basically takes the job of the columns. So since, for example, the first iteration of the first loop, which is I, is 1, running it inside the second for loop, saying I multiplied with j, which is in the first iteration of the inner loop, is also 1, we are getting the number 1. And then we have to iterate that for loop or the inner loop once again, which is then j equals to 2. We multiply it with 1 or with I, then we land in 2, and so on. And after execution of that loop, we are jumping, as we said before, back to the other loop and running the second line, the second row, the third row, and so on. Maybe another tryout would be saying, okay, I want to a bigger table. What I have to do? Let's do that. So I equal or less than 10, or j less than or equal to 10. And if you execute that, our table will get bigger, as you can see here. So now maybe a fun one. The example every Java core or every job interview loves is like printing the triangle of stars. The goal will be one row has 1 star, a second row has 2 stars, a third one has 3 stars, and so on. And here's the trick: the number of stars in a row equals to the row number. So the inner loop should not count to the fixed number. It should just count up to I. So let's do that. Saying, for example, we want to print a star. That line we keep as it was before, and maybe say we want to have 5 rows. And now we are saying if j less than or equal than I, we want to execute that for loop. So that is the condition we want to check here. And what do you think will happen? Let's see it. Voila, we have a triangle built up by stars. So maybe a challenge for you. I will pause the video so you can try it by yourself. And the idea would be by flipping that triangle vertically. So this line should go up, and starting by that line, you will have to print the line before. So basically starting with 5 stars and decreasing it each row by 1, you would then print or flip the triangle. So try it by yourself or see the solution in the next seconds. So the solution would be by changing the variable I. Instead saying 1, we are saying 5, and as soon as I is more or less or equal or more than 1, we want to execute that auto loop, and each round we want to decrease the number 5. So if we execute that, you will see we flip that triangle vertically. Before we wrap up, let me save you some debugging pain. 3 mistakes I see constantly is like, first one, let me clean up here, also here, and saying I, and the second loop, I, 3, once again, I. You will see that the EDA does highlight the inner loop red. So if you don't pay attention to this, this will lead to compile error. So you will not be able to execute it at all, since you already initialized that variable in the outer loop and try to initialize it once again in a nested loop. That's forbidden. So you should use other variable name, right? So let us change it back. Also, some mistakes that people make is that you want to build up logic on your inner loop variable instead of your outer loop, right? So you could also, instead using j, you're using I, or vice versa. So you are basically using accidentally the wrong variable by yourself. Sometimes other problem is that forgetting that the inner loop, in our case that one, would multiply your work. So an outer loop of 1000 and inner loop of 1000 means the inside code runs 1,000,000 times, like, because each run which you executed, you would then 1000 times execute this for loop, and you come up to 1 million execution, and that could be very, very messy performance problem. So you should take this in consideration before building up nested loops or making your solution more performant. So that was all about the Java nested loops. I hope you liked the video, and I would also appreciate if you would subscribe me. I will do my best to share more videos like this. Thank you for watching. See you then, and goodbye.